All right, hello everybody. So we're really excited today. Charles Burns grew up in Seattle in the 1970s. His work rose to prominence in Françoise Mouly and Art Spiegelman's Raw magazine in the mid-1980s, and since then he has worked on a wide range of projects, including album covers, ad campaigns, and set designs. He has illustrated the cover of Time magazine, The New Yorker, and The New York Times. His full-length graphic novel, Black Hole, received Eisner's, Harvey's, and Ignatz Awards. More recently, this summer, Burns won an Eisner Award for Best Writer Artist for 3 of his works, Kommix, that's Kommix, Final Cut, and Unwholesome Love, Love All, amazingly released in the last year. Charles will be interviewed by Craig Fischer, long-term contributor to the Kommix Journal, as well as other comics magazines and websites. He also teaches film and comics in the Appalachian State University. Welcome, Charles Burns and Craig Fischer.
All right, there we go. Yeah. Can you see the slides up here? Because there you go. I guess, Rachel, we're ready to start the slides here on our end. So maybe this would be the first. Oh, no.
Technical difficulty.
Uh-oh.
Well, we're going to talk about, this is my new project. It's called Black Screen.
All right. Well, we'll begin to roll. Over the course of 40-some years, you've drawn comics in a lot of different formats. And it seems to me that one continuity in your career is that you think deeply about which material belongs in which format. We were mentioning up while we were chatting before the event started that when you were in college, you did comic strips for the student paper at Evergreen State University. And in the mid-1980s, you wrote and drew comic strips for alt-weekly newspapers. Was there something about the continuity nature of comic strips that you wanted to explore at that time, or was that just the most convenient venue for you to put your work in?
Well, for me, I went to art school, had no idea what being an artist was, and tried everything, but I found myself wanting to tell stories and wanting to tell comics. And I had reached a point where I was really interested in underground comics and the idea that you could draw and write anything you wanted. It was like your personal work. And so by the time I was out of art school and starting to do comics, I was looking for any venue whatsoever to get published. And I went to various publishers in the Bay Area to show my very early, very bad work, and luckily didn't get any people who wanted to publish it. It was kind of like in the very end of when the popularity of underground comics, that was kind of going away. So I was always just searching for a venue. I moved out to Philadelphia in about 1980, and I would go up to New York City to try to sell show my artwork to get illustration jobs. And while I was up there, there was the first issue of Raw magazine. And for me, this was kind of like what I'd always been looking for. It wasn't an underground comic. It was kind of somewhere in between like a graphics magazine and kind of oversized and beautifully published. And that was really my first kind of step into, I was very lucky that I got into Raw magazine after meeting Art Spiegelman and Françoise Mouly. And so, yeah, there was always just this struggle of I just wanted to get print and work out there. So I remember things like, there was, just struggling for anything. I was trying to get into National Lampoon. I tried to put stuff into Heavy Metal magazine, and they rejected me, but then they eventually took me in, and I published my character El Borba.
Right.
But what happens is like the popularity of certain like certain magazines just folded after a while. So I think that heavy metal went away, and then
And the Lampoon didn't last long.
yeah,
in
the
80s. It was
Lampoon,
sporadic.
yeah. So it was always just searching for that. I didn't want to do mainstream comics. I didn't have the skills to do mainstream comics. At a certain point, my friends, like Linda Berry and Matt Groening, were having a great success in alternative weeklies. And I had at some art event there was a newspaper editor who said, "Oh, if you do I'm starting up the New York Press. If you do a comic for me, I can put you into 5 papers." So I said, "Oh, I'll give that a try." But I kind of went out, I went about it this very kind of ass backwards way of like wanting to do a continued story. So if you think of Linda Berry and Matt Groening, they have continuing characters,
Right.
but they're they're perfect standalone things. If you pick up a weekly paper, you might recognize the characters, but you have an enjoyable comic that you're reading that week.
Barry always has a kicker in the final panel.
Yeah,
Able to
yeah,
seal
and
it, to bring it to a closure.
For me, it was like to be continued next week, and so it was that asking way too much. I wanted to tell longer stories, but I was using this available format, and it wasn't very fair to the readers, I think. I did have people that would clip them out or tell me that they clipped them out and then they would read them together. But the idea was that eventually I'd put them together into a book, and they were reformatted into a book. And I'm blabbering on too long, but
No,
but for me, it was what happens is, so for example, I worked on Black Hole, which was serialized in regular comic book format,
12 of them, yeah.
but with always the anticipation that it would be collected into a book. And it wasn't the idea that, oh, I need to fit into this new world of graphic novels. Is that I wanted to tell a long story, and it come out at just about the right time when people were taking notice. They're like, oh, these are interesting long stories, and
Right.
they're not just for tiny little kids to read.
So that impulse to tell a long story was there from the beginning.
Yeah, always there, and again, always just searching for a venue or a format to do that in. And luckily now it's kind of opened up enough that I feel like I can do whatever I want. So for example, I've been self-publishing things recently, which is just fun, and it's not this kind of monetary thing that I'm chasing after, but it's more just the enjoyment of working in different formats.
Right. No, and just the enjoyment of, well, we'll talk about that in a minute, because one of the interesting things, well, maybe we'll talk about it now, maybe. One of the interesting things is that you say that you like to tell long stories, and that was the major impulse at the beginning of your career. But now you seem to have embraced the fragment, right? Like with comics or with...
It depends on the story. So Black Hole I had a couple of short pieces that were kind of, the ideas were brewing in my head. It's like, okay, this is a story I really want to spend time on. And so it really depends on the particular story. I'm working on a piece now that it's going to be just like 64 or 72 page book, and that's all it's going to be. It won't be just the big, thick, giant volume. So yeah, it depends on the story.
Okay, cool. And as Craig mentioned in his introduction, you also, about the same time that you were doing the strip, were also doing work at Raw Magazine, right? You were working with Françoise and with art in Raw. And I was wondering, what was the editorial process like? I mean, I've heard that
very
they worked
difficult.
very close. Was it?
I mean, you have to keep in mind that I had done my own comics, but they were always very intuitive. There was always me just, like, I've looked at comics, and here's how you do them. And especially early on, they were very helpful there was a lot of editing early on, and it was very helpful in that I think I had my drawing skills, but I didn't have my writing skills, and they were very helpful, both of them, of just sitting down and saying, here's what works, there's a problem with this passage, and so on. So there's a lot of, my early works are literally cut up. There's like, they're like, take a razor blade and cut this piece out, paste in another panel. So there was like actual editing going on early on.
Right.
And these days, I don't really feel like I need that
need
editorial
so much
advice. I
editing,
mean, I appreciate the fact that I can, if I'm going to screw up, if it's a bad story, it's a bad story. But I feel like I've got enough skills to be able to not have any editorial control.
No, I think that's
But
absolutely
it was
true.
incredibly helpful early on for them to look over my shoulder, and it was very helpful.
You were incredibly busy during the 1980s. So in addition to Raw and in addition to the work that you were doing for the alt weeklies, you were submitting to other anthologies. You were and you were also living overseas, right? You lived in Rome for a time in the 1980s, or
So I mentioned before I was in Heavy Metal magazine, which was like kind of a science fiction, magazine that published a lot of French science fiction comics. It was based on a French magazine, and at that time there were a lot of European magazines in Spain and Germany and Italy that I could resell my stories to, and that was kind of a way that I could survive.
right?
At one point in I think around 1984, my wife got a chance to teach in Rome for 2 years, and we had traveled before and met a few cartoonists. So I was very lucky early on, in 1984, living in Rome and meeting, great young cartoonists. We were all young at that point. Like in this picture, there's Lorenzo Matodi on the far left, Massimo Mattioli, who did Squeak the Mouse.
Right.
That's me with red Converse tennis shoes. My buddy Giorgio Carpentieri with the upside-down sunglasses, and that's Gilbert Shelton on the far right. So it was what was nice is rather than just being in an American community and in the school in Rome, I was able to be just to go on trips with my Italian cartoonist friends and also be invited into projects that they were working on. So for example, they got invited to do fashion illustration in a very high-end Vogue. It was run by the folks who do Vogue. So here was this chance for me to do this kind of
To find a new audience. And
yeah.
commercial
But it
art.
was just like a strange thing to do. Like cartoonists are going to do fashion illustration. Okay, and it was fun. So that really opened up a lot as far as just meeting other cartoonists and seeing a very different world instead of the entire American comic scene.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things. I mean, this was the name for this loose band of cartoonists that you hung out with in Rome was Valvoline. What did you learn from the Valvoline experience? Was there a specific sort of approach to story or a specific tendency towards making experimental comics?
Well,
that kind of went
one thing that seemed very different with this particular group. They had influences from America, so they were well aware of of kind of classic American comics, but they also had a lot of interest in art in general, whether it be painting or it wasn't just limited to comics. And I think that's what I was really drawn to their work for that reason. So if you think of the early works of, I don't know if everybody knows Lorenzo Mattotti, but like his early work is almost like looking at miniature paintings.
Yeah.
They're
something like Fire or something?
yeah. So that came out while I was there, and I was just like, it was this eye-opening thing. It was this very expressionist, vivid colors, and using materials that were basically painting, as opposed to what I was used to was like ink and whiteout or ink and paper. And I remember at some point I was there for 2 years, and I remember one of the wives of the cartoonist said, "Charles, you've been here for 2 years and you're not showing enough Italian influence." So I think that my American influences were so ingrained. I mean, I think it was probably doing color work was what the way they approached color was probably something that influenced me as well.
Did you travel to other countries? Like, for example, I think your work was showed up in El Vibora, for example, right? Did you go? Were you able to go to Spain while you were over there for 2 years? Or
Yeah, I mean, we were lucky enough to be able to travel around. So going to France and going to Spain, and there was just that. Again, I was mentioning those magazines. There was that kind of a network. So if I went to France, it was like I'm going to the editorial offices of, I won't pronounce it, Metal Hurlant.
Right.
Hurlant.
I don't know.
And so, so meeting some of the folks there as well. So it was an entry point by being published in those magazines.
Sure, and they were probably all familiar with your work from Raw, too. So
Yeah, I think that was the start of it.
calling card, yeah.
Sure.
The big project, of course, in the 90s and into about half of the 2000s was Black Hole. I think you worked on that for 10 years, is that right?
Yeah, that's the part that's always like, that gets pointed out to me all the time.
I'm sorry.
It's like, almost like that makes it a good comic that he spent 10 years. That's just because I'm really slow. And I mean, also during that time, I worked very slowly, but also during that time, my paying jobs would be doing commercial illustration,
Right,
whether it's
doing portraits for the Believer and things like
that.
that.
That was even later, but doing, it was kind of like that was my straight job, and then I would kind of alternate between those two things. One was a good paying job, and one was something that, if I was living by myself and didn't have a family, then I would probably scrape by. But
Right.
Anyway, so serialized over 10 years, and it just kind of took as long as it took to make. I remember, it was something that, I was editing and changing and writing, and I think originally there were going to be 13 issues, but it just ended up, the long story that I needed to tell.
Sure.
And it was really good. It was a turning point in the sense that I had reached a point where I realized I really wanted to do stories about characters, about character-driven stories, where in the past I think a lot of my stories were ideas of plot-driven stories, and the other side of it was to not edit myself in any way, in the sense that I wasn't even really aware that I was editing myself as far as the subject matter.
Mm-hmm. And
so there were things that were much more personal or revealing or kind of upsetting to some people maybe, but that was a choice too, that I just wanted to say anything that I wanted to say or felt like I needed to say. And so it was a real decision on my part, just to set my earlier work aside.
I think it was time well spent, particularly because I think it's the most definitive and deepest version of teen plague, right? I mean, a trope in your work is using disease as a metaphor for the angst and confusion of adolescence in particular. You've said in your interviews, other interviews, that you've never got over high school. And what is it about the teen years you can't shake? What is it?
God, I'm going to be turning 70 this month, and why are you still doing these stories about teenagers? I don't, for me, it just has so much to do with a period of my life that was just so filled with emotion and intensity that, I'm not really interested in talking about my middle-aged, quiet lifestyle of sitting inside, and I don't have a good answer, but it comes back to me. There's just like an intensity that subject matter that pulls me back in.
A writer that I really admire named David Bordwell once called it the adolescent window. It's the moment where you start moving beyond your family and you open up to art and culture that exists outside of your family. Do you think that's part of the intensity? Do you think that's part of the confusion?
I don't know if I understand. I'm not sure if I
Well, like say for example, the first time you read a book that has nothing to do with your parents or with your family, and you read that book and you think that book was written for me.
But I mean, all of my stories, I wanted to get away from my parents, and I never wanted to deal with any of that was just too hurtful and difficult. So
right,
it was like focusing in on that kind of personal intensity of that time period.
Okay. Black Hole was another work that was serialized, as you said, over 10 years in 12 comics. And it was originally published by Kitchen Sink, and then when Kitchen Sink went through some difficulties, it got picked up by Fantagraphics. But that was kind of the standard formula back then, right? That is, you had Dan Clowes releasing chapters of Ghost World in 8-ball before it would be published as a separate book, or
right. I mean, so
Jimmy
yeah, it's almost what I was saying before. It's like, oh,
Right.
here's how comics are made.
Right.
You figure out Hate or 8-ball or Dirty Plot or
Right.
whatever the series like, and that's where you put your books, put your stories, and eventually they might get collected. But
Right.
but that was the format, and that went away.
Yeah.
Maybe it's coming back. Hopefully it is.
I don't know. I mean, it's hard
I
for me
get
to
there.
think of.
Yeah, I don't know. There's folks that are doing some good small
Right.
comics again.
How old were you when you first read Hergé? I ask because, obviously the books that are collected in Last Look are kind of a homage to Hergé in some ways. Do you want to talk about the influence of, say, the Franco-Belgian comics on you?
Yeah, I mean, so in America, there were 6 Tintin books that were published with American translation, not English translation. So they were published in America, and it just so happened that my dad was interested in comics and brought home Tintin books for me, and before I could read. So you're asking when I started reading them. I started looking at them when I was
Even before you could
probably
read.
5 years old.
Yeah.
So, and there was something that just really stood out as far as just the color and the drawing and the characters. And for me, it just kind of, I was that age that it just kind of got embedded in the back of my head. They were, as an adult, I can look back at, some of the stories and be critical of the subject matter or how some folks are represented.
Right.
But on the other hand, as a kid, they were just this revelation and this kind of world that I could enter into. And
Do you feel like you inherited that kind of like clarity of expression of being able to nail down something and,
I don't know. Like when I know they're an influence, but I don't see the direct influence in my work.
Right.
I know it's there somewhere.
Right.
And I certainly see his influence on a huge amount of
Sure.
Franco-Belgian artists
Sure.
or people that admire that work, but maybe in just the characterization or I don't know the clarity, but as far as like the subject matter and the drawing style that hasn't really didn't find its way into my work as much. So
did it find the way again into the format because you published it as 3?
Yeah, that was
quite intentional.
That was very intentional. So again, I always had this love for that format of the Franco-Belgian albums, and
Right.
there were 64 pages. And before I started working on this series, I actually got a ruler out and figured out exactly what the page size was, and it was not a great format to have books published or serialized in the United States. It was like, what's this thing, and why does it have a cloth spine? And
Right.
we're going to wait 2 years for the rest of the story to come out, and there was just this kind of confusion. Whereas in Europe or in France especially, it's normal to serialize
Yes.
a story in 2 or 3 parts.
Sure.
So
Speaking of which,
speaking of which, yeah.
yeah, I mean, what would become Final Cut in the United States was serialized in France in exactly that format, right? In the album format.
Right, and so I had a discussion with my American publisher, and they said, well, you could serialize it, but it's not they discouraged me, and I understood why. Whereas, and on the other hand, I've got a great French publisher, Cornelius, and they publish beautiful books, and my sense was that, sometimes you think, you're hoping you're going to get through the whole series, or you hope you're going to get the book done. But I think I wanted to have like some reward or like something published out in the world. Sure. And something that's concrete. So it was nice to have it serialized there, and then see, oh, here's this finished piece as I'm working on it.
Right.
So some reward there, I guess.
The title in French means mazes, right?
Yeah, labyrinth or maze.
Right.
Yeah.
And a question then, which title do you like better, and how do both of the titles kind of connect to the story that you're trying to tell?
In my situation, well, when I was talking to my publisher, I had still not worked out a title. I had 5 different titles that I was working from, and I suggested some, and eventually I just said, you're a publisher, you publish great books, I'll let you work out a title that you think is appropriate. So that was how that worked.
Did they explain why they chose mazes as the title, or?
I don't even think I've ever asked. I mean, I understand why, but on the other hand, I didn't question them. So
why does it feel like an appropriate title to you, even if you're not the person who came up with it?
Why does it seem appropriate?
Yeah, for the story.
I don't want to get into that. So, then I have to. There's nothing I hate more than explaining my stories, or so I kind of like I have to explain why it's a maze. No, I don't know.
I mean, I'm sorry.
No, you don't have to be sorry at all. I'm just going to next.
All right, fair enough. At BubblesCon this year, when you were talking about Final Cut, you said that you were in a dry spell for a while before you found an image that inspired Final Cut, specifically a sketch that you had done as a teenager. Yeah. When you were at a party and you were drunk and tripping and you were looking at your distorted reflection in the chrome surface of a toaster. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Can we describe Final Cut based on that scene and some of the other scenes in the book as more directly autobiographical than your previous books? Is that fair?
I don't think. I think there's something about that scene, but no, I wouldn't say it's more autobiographical. I think all of my characters, in one way or another, either reflect me or reflect people I know very closely. So whether it's male characters or female characters, I think there's some facet of my personality.
Some aspect, right.
Yeah. But yeah, so there was just that incident. Again, yeah, I was having a dry spell of just like starting and stopping, kind of second guessing myself and thinking, Jesus, I've been doing comics for years and years, and why don't I know how to do this? Why is this such a trouble? I had like maybe 3 or 4 false starts of like extensive notes, finished pages, and just reaching a point like, this is shit, just like horrible, just like making me feel bad looking at it, and that's never good. So at some point I just said, I'll just do a 7-page story, and if I can't do that, I'm going to start working in some other field or find some other way of making art, because this isn't working.
Right.
So I kind of forced myself into that kind of limited, like 7 pages. If you can't do that, then get out. And I took this idea of, as you mentioned, this drawing I did, the self-portrait I did, sitting stoned in my friend's kitchen looking into a toaster and seeing myself as this kind of strange alien creature. And the idea that here's this beautiful girl comes in and admires the drawing. And that's what I was hoping for back in the day, but that never happened, I assured you. It was just my stoned buddies sitting out in the front room, so that didn't happen. But on the other hand, That's not
autobiographical.
yeah, there's nothing autobiographical about it. So that was just a way that I got into the story. It's like, okay, here's this character, and oh, there's something there. And so it suddenly kind of broke the ice, and I was able to find my way into a story, and I liked these characters and was able to move forward.
Were you a monster kid when you were growing up like Brian?
You can tell I'm a monster kid. I'm still a monster human being. But yes, I was.
I meant like monster kid in terms of watching monster movies.
I know that. I'm trying to be a smart ass. I'm still a monster. God. No, I was the perfect age. So I was born in 1955. So like somewhere very early 60s was this kind of monster craze. And for me, it was just like, that was just fun. There were models, magazines, TV shows, and it just, I loved all that stuff, absolutely.
Super 8 abridgments of horror films that you could buy and watch.
That was later. Well, I would get monster magazines. In the back of the magazines, there were advertisements for, you could buy your own movie, your own 8mm movie of Varan, the Unbelievable, or whatever it was,
Sure.
the monster that challenged the world. And they were always just the worst movies, but it just seemed like a fantasy because they were like $5 or something like that. This impossible amount of money. And it wasn't until I was in high school that I met a friend who had like this big stash of these movies, and we'd be able to watch them. And they were horrible, but this was like predating, any
Right.
VHS or any way that you would ever be able to watch movies other than on television.
Or
So-
at a revival theater,
or
is
at a
not
revival
super
theater, which,
common.
but we were still a little young to be going, getting
Sure.
out and going to movies by ourselves, or, drive, we didn't drive yet, so you couldn't go out to cheap, shitty drive-ins. But anyway, so that was, that certainly fed into the story that I was working on, the idea that my friends and I made our own movies as well. So it was like, oh, he had a movie camera, we can make our own movies, and that was fun. So that fed into the story as well.
Can you describe one of the movies to us?
I could, but I don't know if anybody in this audience really want. They were just, we were kind of enamored with. Let me put it this way: we would go into our parents' kitchen and we would get the blender out and make blood, but by the quart, so it was just kind of like bad. Like kids that we would get our white shirts, our white Sunday go-to-meeting shirts, so we would look like adults. If you wear a white shirt, you look like an adult. And it was just like, plastic guns and shooting each other and death scenes. It was just a death scene after another. You're like, all right, fill your mouth with blood, and then you fall forward and there's a big gush of blood. So it's kind of depicted in, one of the sequences here.
With that little creature that's crawling on the ground.
Yeah, right. We didn't have any movies that were that sophisticated, but yeah.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, it was. It kept us busy in the summer.
Before you learn to drive.
Before I learned to drive, exactly.
Brian in Final Cut is a passive and somewhat, I don't want to say sad character, but definitely moody. He never manages, I went too far. He never manages to kind of communicate to Laurie the way that he feels. And he fades in and out of conversations with people when he gets kind of lost in his dreams. When he catches Laurie and Tina having sex, spoiler alert, he disassociates so much that he becomes an abstracted outline on the page, like he removes himself from the situation. But he's also the most creative of his friend group, right? His art is odd and beautiful. He loves the movies. He's eager to make his own films more than everybody else. Are you saying that there is something inherent about the artistic temperament that means that the artist needs to step back a little bit from life in order to be able to observe life? Or I know you hate to interpret your own stories.
No, I know, but I don't know. For me, I can only speak for myself, in the fact that it is this incredibly solitary, for me anyway, this incredibly solitary occupation.
Right.
Occasionally there's situations where I, work with other people, but it's always just kind of fun and light where we're doing something, occasionally.
Jamming, right.
Jamming on something, exactly. So that's fun, but the idea of creating something that I care about is this very introspective, I'm not talking to anybody about story ideas. I have no input from anybody. Right. So it is this, it is a very solitary thing. So I'm guessing that kind of finds its way into this story. Mm-hmm.
What were you thinking when you actually designed that page that had Brian just represented?
Well, originally the first drawing I did is you see him naked, just his full body naked, and for some reason that whole frontal, I wanted to have that kind of confrontational image.
Right.
But as I did it, So I did it in two pieces. So his body and then the whole surrounding background that would drop back a little bit. But when I put it together, it felt very flat. It didn't have the impact that I wanted to do. I wanted to have this very, naked guy in confrontational image, and it didn't work. And I mean, that's part of what making art is that you try something and you find out it doesn't work. So, and then I tried it. I looked at the silhouette with the background, and that just seemed much stronger to me. So that was the end product of that.
It's an amazing moment, and I think one of the reasons why it's an amazing moment is that we don't have that confrontation and we don't see the emotion on his face.
Right. So he's taken
almost
away from that. Yeah.
Right. One of the things that's interesting about Final Cut is it's much more realistic than your previous work, right? It's about a girl discovering her desires and a boy who maybe lives a little bit too much in his head, but there's no monsters, no body horror, no bizarre cults, none of that. Brian, in particular, is moved deeply by two movies on the big screen. The first being 1956 Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which he sees with Laurie on a sort of pseudo date that they go on, and 1970's The Last Picture Show. Does Final Cut's shift towards realism, is it paralleled by Brian moving from Invasion of the Body Snatchers to The Last Picture Show?
That's a good question. Again, so much of the work I do is intuitive, and I mean, I just remember seeing Last Picture Show at when it came out in theaters, and just being devastated by it.
It's a great movie. It really holds up.
And going with my friend and his sister, and remembering that we walked out of the theater and we didn't talk to each other for 20 minutes. We were just and it was just took the breath out of us. So there was something about the intensity of that somehow Brian's character is internalizing that intensity of that movie.
Right.
And again, there's the kind of, again, I don't want to overanalyze, but if you know the movie, there's the kind of the beautiful Sybil Shepherd character who's this kind of idealized, perfect blonde girl, and somehow Brian's kind of idealizing, the female protagonist, and so I wanted to have a little bit of that parallel of him looking at this idealized vision of a woman.
And it also manifests in the third part of Final Cut with the watch, right, where he kind of relives an actual moment from The Last Picture Show with Laurie.
See, I think you can read the book and not make all those connections, but that was certainly intentional. I thought, oh shit, I got to go back, because I did a panel with no watch on her. She's got to be always wearing a watch. So I found oh shit, I got to go back.
Got to go back and fix
draw a watch in.
That's funny. Also in Final Cut, you draw loving portraits of Kevin McCarthy and, as you said, Sybil Shepherd. Right. Sybil Shepherd's portrait being drawn by Brian in the story itself. There's realistic portraiture all over your art, right? Especially in the commercial portraits you drew for a decade or more for the literary culture magazine The Believer. Why do realistic faces fascinate you so much? Why is the human face so compelling to you?
Well, okay, so if you look at, in Final Cut, you've got
I can go back.
The characters that are cartoon characters, and so they're very generalized characters, and I have a tendency to draw all of my people. They all kind of eventually morph into the same. Here's a young guy. Here's an attractive young woman. Here's an attractive young guy. They unless I differentiate them with red hair or short blonde hair, they look pretty similar. And that's my lack of, I won't say lack of skill, but that's the way that I draw characters. On the other hand, if I did a cartoony version of Sybil Shepherd or I wanted to look exactly like the movie. So I'm working directly, exactly, mimicking what that movie looks like or that scene looks like. So there's an odd, back and forth where cartoon character, super realistic photo referenced character. But that's the reason behind that. And the same thing with the portraiture. It's like if I there's people who are very good at doing caricatures and doing, very great likenesses of, further illustrations. But for me, I'm always using very direct photo references.
Right.
So that's where that comes from.
Okay. And this is, you were gracious enough to send me portraits of punk artists.
There's Lydia Lunch, and I can't remember the name of the guy. He was in a band called the Deadbeats, and there's
I was going to ask you about him. I didn't recognize him either.
What's that? That's Alice Bag, when she's very young.
And,
She was in an LA band called The Bags.
Right.
And that's Alice Bag.
and still active and still recording records. Yeah.
Yeah.
One final question, then maybe we'll open it up to the audience if that's okay. Sure. One book I really love is The Mysteries of Harris Burdick by Chris Van Allsburg, which consists of single pictures taken from fictional books, fragments of stories never told in the first place. Oh. So Van Allsburg images are usually accompanied by evocative captions. So the words for this one is, "He had warned her about the book, now it was too late." And that's all you have. Similarly, in the projects that Craig mentioned in the introduction, Kommix and Unwholesome Love, you give us covers from unpublished comic books, right? Pictures that retain a mystery that more straightforward narratives shed when they become clearer. So that's kind of what I was getting at in the earlier question, which is, on the one hand, you tell very detailed, and now, in the case of Final Cut, very realistic narrative. But here, you're getting back maybe some of the mystery by withholding everything but a single image to kind of like
I mean, I think
that magic again?
part of it comes from being, when I was very young, like going to a comic book store, like the early comic book stores, and seeing these kind of magazines in plastic up on the wall, and you're only seeing the covers, but they look really interesting, but you don't know what's inside. So I kind of got into this whole idea of doing fake comic book covers, and I actually print them out and put them in little bags, and I've had some exhibitions where I show the actual kind of bagged comic, but it comes from that. And it also comes from traveling and going to, being in France and seeing, this looks like an amazing book, but I can't read it. The artwork's beautiful, but I can't read it because it's in French. So, I mean, there's some cases where I've loved a book and then actually read it translated later and like, oh, I guess I don't love it so much anymore, unfortunately. But so that's where that comes from. And again, even when you were talking about the single image of Brian as a silhouette, so that's something that doesn't have narrative or anything. It's just you're deciding for yourself because you decided what that meant.
Right.
I didn't tell you what that meant. You're reading it in that context. So that's what, using single images, I've always been interested in that idea of that kind of mystery of presenting something without an explanation per se.
And it's also a different mode to work in, It gives you a break from maybe the larger narratives and allows you to play a little bit in that sort of mysterious playground of what that image might evoke in your reader. All right, well, let's open it up to folks in the audience. Is there anybody in the audience who'd like to ask a question? Yes, back there. Yeah, yep.
Oh, yeah. So after I'd finished Black Hole, I was offered to work on an independent French production of it's called Fears of the Dark, and it was a collection of pretty much, I think they were all illustrators or cartoonists that had never worked in animation before, or it had limited work in animation, and the producers, their idea was like, it'll be in black and white, there'll be segments, we'll edit it into a feature-length movie. But what was unusual, and the reason that I accepted the job, was they wanted me to do everything. Like, it's your writing, your editing, you're doing the sound, the voice actors, all of those things, which I knew nothing about. So it seemed very intriguing or interesting to try. And I very quickly realized that writing for an animated movie has nothing to do with my skills as a cartoonist. They're two very, very different things. And luckily I had people I was working with that were very patient with me. So I can write a script, I can figure that part out. Even doing like a storyboard, it made sense. It felt like a little bit like comics. But actually putting motion to characters and timing things and figuring all that out was incredibly difficult and nerve-wracking. And there were a lot of constraints as well. There were financial constraints. So they were using like this special kind of 3D imaging, the 3D animation that, there was things you could do and you couldn't do. There was like, oh, I want to have a big crowd scene. Well, we can use 3 people, so that's going to change my story as I'm working on it. Oh, it's too expensive to have that person talking, so they're going to put their hand over their mouth. So there are things like that. Anyway, to answer your question or answer some of it, I really enjoyed doing it. There was things that were very frustrating, but it also taught me that I really prefer doing comics or my own comics because you have absolute 100% control. Even if it means me going down to the local copy shop to print out some Xerox copies of my comic, it's all mine, and I'm lucky in that regard. So even though they gave me a huge amount of we want you to do everything, it's still a collaborative medium that you need to, there's so many constraints. So that part.
And some compromises.
Yeah, yeah, of course, a huge amount of compromises, yeah.
Other questions? Yeah, right there.
Oh my God, you don't want to, do not join, no, I know. Well, at this point I live by myself, so I wake up when I wake up, depends on, I kind of work every day, all day, but it can be like sometimes, I sit down and I kind of penciled in part of a head, I better take a break. And 2 hours later, after doom scrolling for a while, it really depends. So on a good day, you feel like you've accomplished something and you're working through. But I'm also reached an age where I have the freedom to work or not work. And as Carol Tyler, who I was talking with earlier, she said, and I agree with her, I don't give a shit. I've reached that point where I don't have to give a shit. So. Right. There's a certain freedom in that. And I'm not trying to be. I sound like I'm being. I don't know what I sound like I'm being, but so my day is like.
You've earned the right to be free.
I don't know. It doesn't feel like that. It just. I don't feel that pressure to produce the way I used to. So, but I work 7 days a week on something. So yeah, depends. Some days like I just printed out a little 3D theater that I cut out, and I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I spending my time doing this? And even the Unwholesome Love, that comic book that I self-published, it's a romance comic that I worked on looking at old Charlton comics, and that was actually fun. But I don't have to feel like, oh, this is kind of a waste of my time because it's a little bit kind of lowbrow or it's. I can do what I want, is what I'm saying, and I'm lucky in that regard.
Maybe 2 or 3 more questions. Yeah, front row.
Oh, you don't know me very well. That's a problem. Not necessarily, but it does. Yeah, I don't. I mean, on this last piece that I've been working on, it was like maybe this is the last thing. But I guess there is, like I said, I feel like there's some kind of freedom where I don't feel like I need to prove myself, or I can just work on some side project, and if it's something enjoyable. I guess for me, if I'm working. I mean, I enjoy working because I need to do that. That's part of who I am. But if I'm working on something It can be, like I said, a little toy theater or something like that, but it's being engaged in something like that. So I don't know as far as like, I mean, every time I finish a book, it's like, I don't know if I've got anything else in me, and that may be the case. I'm working on another stupid romance comic, and I'm like, this has to be the last one. There's got to be the last one, because it just, come on. I'm like, oh, this shit again. Oh, God. But, I mean, I guess I judge work, like if I'm looking at it and it's giving something back to me, then I'm okay with that. If it's something that's giving something back to me, or it's something unexpected that I'm enjoying, then that's kind of the proof, like, okay, continue with this, it's okay. So, yeah.
Great. Couple more questions. Let's see. In the black, in the middle there.
Right. Right. Yeah, I've been living in Philadelphia for almost 40 years, and yeah, there was taking time out for 1 year in Rome, but I've been in Philadelphia for a long time, and she was mentioning a store in Philadelphia called Partners and Son, and they started out initially as kind of, here's a gallery with some books, and they kind of opened up right after COVID, and I just there was I don't know how I heard about it, but there was a Lolly Westphund exhibition there, or she was part of a group exhibition, so like, oh, I want to go down and see her work, and met them. And since then, they've really been this kind of epicenter of interesting cartoonists coming to town and showing exhibitions. They're running a show coming up next month, of independent cartoonists. So, yeah, I mean, I do everything I can think of that will be kind of helpful to keep that going and being supportive of them. So, and that just never really existed in Philadelphia that I was ever aware of. And suddenly here was this chance to, work with those folks, and they're great. Yeah. So, yeah. They actually did they published, or they printed and published the independent, the book I did, Unwholesome Love. So they distributed that, and so yeah, they were great.
One more question.
I think initially there was a particular artist that I was starting at, and I think I'd done Unwholesome Love, and I liked that idea of looking directly at existing romance comics. And what I quickly found out is that there was a constraint there in the sense of, oh, I need this scene, and I'm like flipping through, and it was like a really bad way to work. So there was kind of an entry point of like, I want to have it look like. The artist's name is Bill Drought, if you know who that is. She knows. Does anybody else know who Bill Drought is? No. Oh, back there. Okay, good. He was someone who did very early work for Simon and Kirby, or Jack Kirby's studio, and then he did great romance comics for DC, and then later on did. Anyway, he was a person whose style transformed, and I really liked this artist, and I really liked this unnamed artist, because they never signed their work. And then I figured out that those two artists were the same person, and it was kind of fascinating. So I started basing a comic on some of his work, and then I realized I had to just do my own story.
Okay. Well, it's 5 o'clock and time for the reception, so why don't you join me in thanking Charles for his appearance today.